The massive Federation cruiser, Star Dominion, drifted through space like a shining silver needle. Its polished hull reflected the light of distant stars, every curve and surface designed to show the galaxy who held the real power. On the bridge, alien officers moved with practiced precision, their movements flowing like water around the command stations. Talwex stepped into the observation deck, his forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the approaching human vessel. As chief engineer of the Federation's most advanced ships, he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. Klingon battle cruisers with their brutal efficiency, Vulcan science vessels with their mathematical perfection, even the crystal ships of the crystalline entities that sang through space itself. But this human ship looked like someone had built it in a junkyard. "Look at that thing," Talwex said to his assistant, a young officer named Vector who trembled slightly when addressing the legendary engineer. "They've welded armor plates over armor plates. The hull looks like someone attacked it with hammers, and those weapons, they're sticking out at all the wrong angles." The human vessel, which their communication logs identified as the Iron Phoenix, moved closer. Its hull was a patchwork of dark metals, scarred and rough. Compared to the Federation's smooth organic curves, it looked like a flying brick with spikes stuck to it. "Sir," Vector said nervously, "the humans only achieved faster-than-light travel 67 years ago. Perhaps we should—" "Exactly," Talwex interrupted. 67 years. The Andorians had elegant, warp-capable ships when my grandfather was still learning to walk. These humans are children playing with technology they barely understand. The communication system crackled to life. "Federation vessel Star Dominion, this is Captain Hyun of the UES Iron Phoenix. We're transmitting docking coordinates now. Welcome to our sector." Talwex's eyebrows rose. The human's voice was calm, steady, professional. No stammering, no excitement about meeting the mighty Federation. No requests for autographs or technology transfers that usually came from newly contacted species. "Interesting," Talwex murmured. "They're either very confident or very stupid." On the main screen, the human ship grew larger. Talwex could see more details now, the oddly placed sensor arrays, the weapons that seemed to violate every principle. Of ship design he knew, and something else. The ship's hull seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the metal itself was alive. "Sir," the ship's science officer reported, "I'm getting strange readings from their vessel. The hull composition appears to be unusual." "Unusual how?" "It contains elements I don't recognize. And the energy readings, they're all wrong. The power signature suggests they're generating far more energy than a ship that size should be able to produce." Talwex laughed. "Humans, and how their modifications. They probably installed some dangerous, unstable reactor that'll blow up if they look at it wrong. We'll add that to our report." Minutes later, Talwex found himself in the transporter room, adjusting his environmental suit. He carried a standard Federation scanning device, a sleek, palm-sized unit that could analyze any known technology in the galaxy. "Remember," he told his team, "we're here to inspect their ship, document their primitive attempts at starship engineering, and file our report. The human ship will probably fall apart if we touch it wrong, so be careful. We don't want to accidentally destroy their only warp-capable vessel." The transporter activated, and Talwex felt the familiar tingle as his molecules scattered and reformed aboard the human ship. He materialized in what appeared to be their transporter room, though it looked nothing like Federation technology. Instead of the usual clean, sterile chamber, this room had a more industrial feel. The walls were covered with panels that hummed with barely contained energy. Strange cables ran along the ceiling like metallic vines. Captain Hyun stood waiting, wearing a simple uniform in deep blue and black. No fancy decorations, no ceremonial weapons, just practical clothing for a working spaceship. Beside him stood a young woman in engineering colors. "Chief Engineer Talwex," Captain Hyun said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm Captain Hyun. This is Lieutenant Yoon, our Chief Engineering Officer." Talwex studied them both. They seemed remarkably calm for beings meeting. Their first Galactic Federation inspection team. Usually new species were either terrified or trying desperately to impress. These humans just seemed professional. "We're honored to show you our ship," Lieutenant Yoon said. Her voice carried no trace of the nervousness Talwex expected. "We've prepared a complete tour of all our systems." As they left the transporter, Talwex noticed something that made him pause. The walls weren't just metal. They seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm like a heartbeat. When he reached out to touch one, his scanning device immediately began displaying readings that made no sense at all. The first thing that struck Talwex about the Iron Phoenix wasn't what he saw, it was what he didn't see. No elaborate, welcoming committee. No nervous junior officers hovering in the background, no ceremonial displays of their greatest achievements. Just 3 humans standing in a simple corridor, waiting to show him around like this was the most normal thing in the galaxy. Captain Hyun was shorter than most species Talwex had encountered, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His uniform was practical, no flashy decorations or intimidating armor, just clean, functional clothing that looked like it had seen real work. Lieutenant Yoon stood beside him, looking interested rather than intimidated. She held a tablet in one hand and gestured casually with the other as she spoke. "We kept the tour route simple for today. Engineering first, then the main systems, and bridge last. Is there anything specific you'd like to see?" Talwex almost laughed. In his 300 years of ship inspections, no one had ever asked him what he wanted to see. They always started with whatever they thought would impress him most, usually their biggest guns or fastest engines. "Just show us everything," he said, activating his scanner. Immediately, the device began chirping with confused beeps and error messages. As they walked deeper into the ship, Talwex realized something was very wrong with his instruments. The scanner kept trying to identify the hull material and failing. According to its readings, the walls were made of something that both existed and didn't exist at the same time. "Interesting corridor design," Talwex commented, trying to sound professional, while his scanner had what could only be described as an electronic nervous breakdown. "Oh, that's because they're alive," Yoon said casually, like she was discussing the weather. Talwex stopped walking. "Excuse me?" "The walls," Captain Hyun explained, noticing the aliens' confusion. "They're made from biometallic composites. They can repair themselves, adapt to different types of damage, and even grow new sections when needed." The Federation engineer reached out to touch the wall. It felt like metal, but warm, and unless he was imagining things, it seemed to respond to his touch, the surface rippling slightly under his fingers. "That's impossible," he muttered. But the wall clearly didn't care about his opinion. They continued walking. Lieutenant Yoon pointed to various systems as they passed, each one more puzzling than the last. The lighting panels seemed to shift color, based on who was walking beneath them. The air circulation system hummed with a sound that reminded Talwex of breathing. "Here's one of our favorite innovations," Yoon said, stopping beside a section of wall that looked like it was full of glowing veins. "The neural grid." Talwex stared at the crystalline conduits that ran through the ship like a nervous system. They pulsed with light, not the steady, predictable pulse of energy transfer, but something more organic, more alive. "Neural grid?" he asked. "Think of it as the ship's nervous system," Captain Hyun explained. "Every system is connected. The ship can think about problems, learn from experience, and adapt its responses. Instead of having separate computers for navigation, weapons, and life support, everything's integrated." The scanner in Talwex's hand gave up entirely and shut itself off. "Your scanner having trouble?" Yoon asked, genuinely concerned. "Sometimes our technology interferes with older sensors." Older sensors. This was the latest Federation technology. But before Talwex could respond, they rounded a corner and he saw something that made his 2 brains struggle to process the information. The corridor opened into a vast chamber where crew members worked alongside machines that looked like they belonged in a dream. Engineers moved through the space like dancers, their hands guiding holographic displays that responded to their thoughts. Tools floated in mid-air, moving where they were needed before anyone asked for them. A young man named Jin looked up from a panel he was working on. "Captain, want to show them the gravity manipulation system?" "Gravity manipulation?" Talwex whispered. "Sure," Yoon said. She touched a control, and suddenly Talwex felt himself becoming lighter. Not weightless, just perfectly comfortable, as if gravity was adjusting itself to his needs. His forearms moved more easily. His back stopped aching. From carrying his heavy equipment, we figured out how to ask gravity nicely instead of fighting against it, Jin explained. Much more efficient than the old brute force methods. Talwex looked around the engineering section. Everything was wrong. Everything violated the fundamental laws of physics he'd spent his life studying. Everything worked perfectly anyway. I need to see more, he said quietly. Captain Hyun smiled. We were hoping you'd say that. Lieutenant Yoon gestured toward a doorway that led deeper into the ship. Our engineering section is through here. I think you'll find it interesting. Talwex followed, expecting to find the usual sprawling engine, rooms that every interstellar vessel required. Federation ships needed entire decks for their warp cores, with massive coolant systems, containment fields, and shielding. Even the most advanced Vulcan ships required impressive engineering sections to manage their faster-than-light travel. When the doors opened, Talwex stopped completely. The room was smaller than his personal quarters, back on the Star Dominion. In the center sat what looked like a simple metal sphere, about the size of a Federation escape pod. It hummed quietly like a cat purring. "This is it?" Talwex asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Our FTL drive," Jin confirmed, patting the sphere like it was a pet. "We call her Sophie. She's been with us since day one." But Talwex circled the device, his instruments going haywire. "Where's the massive reactor? The containment systems? The radiation shielding that should be the size of a building?" Engineer Min looked up from her console. "Why would we need all that?" "Because warp drive requires enormous amounts of energy." Talwex exclaimed. "You need to tear a hole in space-time itself. The energy requirements are so massive that most species need to build their entire ship around the drive." The humans exchanged glances. Jin grinned. "Want to see it work?" Before Talwex could answer, Eun was already at the controls. "Clear for micro-jump," she announced. "Distance 10,000 kilometers, duration 3 seconds." On the Federation ship, this announcement would have triggered dozens of safety protocols. Alarms would sound. Crew members would brace for the violent shaking that came with every jump. The lights would flicker as the entire ship's power grid focused on the warp core. On the Iron Phoenix, Jin simply pressed a button. The universe blinked. One moment they were in front of Talwex's Federation cruiser. The next moment, they were 10,000 kilometers away. No shaking, no warning alarms, no violent energy discharge that lit up space like a small star exploding. Talwex's legs gave out. He sat heavily on a nearby box, which turned out to be comfortable as it adjusted its shape to support him. "How?" he whispered. "Sophie doesn't tear holes in space," Yoon explained patiently. "She asks space politely to bend a little. Much cleaner, much quieter." Talwex looked at his instruments again. The power readings made no sense. According to his scanners, the ship was drawing energy from absolutely nothing, feeding off the zero-point field that existed between atoms. "Your power readings," he said faintly. "They show zero-point energy tap. But that's just theoretical. No one has ever built a working zero-point extractor," Jin laughed. "Theoretical? We've been powering our ships this way for 20 years. Want some coffee? The replicator runs on the same system." Before Talwex could answer, an alert chimed softly. Captain Hyun's voice came over the comm system. "Engineering. We've got company. 3 Sarkanian raiders just dropped out of hyperspace. Mind showing them why that was a bad idea?" "With pleasure, Captain," Min replied. She turned to Talwex. "Want to see our weapons?" Still feeling dizzy from the jump demonstration, Talwex nodded weakly. They moved to another section of the engineering deck. Here, a massive display showed the ship's weapon systems. Talwex expected to see the usual massive energy cannons, torpedo tubes, and pulse weapons that most warships carried. Instead, he saw something that looked like mathematical equations that had learned to dance. "Those aren't weapons," he said. "Those are formulas." "Math is just the universe's programming language," Jin explained. "We figured out how to rewrite a few lines of code." On the main screen, the 3 Sarkanian ships appeared, predatory vessels known throughout the Bu galaxy for their aggressive raids. Their weapons were already charging, energy building for an attack. Min touched her console gently. Weapons online. There was no sound of charging weapons, no vibration of massive guns moving into position. Just a soft hum, like someone humming a lullaby. The starfield around the Sarkanian ships began to change. Space itself seemed to fold, twist, and compress. The three warships found themselves trapped in bubbles of curved space-time, unable to move, their weapons firing harmlessly into distorted dimensions that led nowhere. "You're bending space around them," Talwex breathed. "Just temporarily," Min assured him. "They'll be back to normal in about an hour. Should give them time to think about their life choices." Talwex stared at the display. The Federation's most powerful weapons could barely scratch a Sarkanian raider's shields. These humans had made 3 of them completely helpless with what looked like a gentle suggestion to the universe itself. 20 years, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You've had this technology for 20 years. "Actually," Yoon said cheerfully, "these are the old systems. Wait until you see what we've been working on lately." Commander Min gestured for Talwex to follow her to what looked like an ordinary section of the ship's hull. She placed her hand against the wall, and immediately the metal began to change, flowing like liquid while remaining solid. "Watch this," she said, pulling a small device from her tool belt. She pressed it against the wall, creating a small scratch in the surface. Within seconds, the scratch began to close. The metal flowed together like water, then solidified again. In less than 10 seconds, there was no trace that any damage had ever been done. "Living metal," Min explained. "We don't think of our ship as a machine anymore. We think of it as an organism. It heals wounds, it learns from damage, it adapts." Talwex reached out with trembling hands to touch the spot. The metal felt warm under his fingers, and he could swear he felt a pulse, like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper. "But how did you develop this?" he asked. "The research alone should have taken centuries." Captain Hyun joined them, overhearing the question. "That's the thing about humans," he said. "We don't start with the right answer. We start with the wrong answer and fix it until it works." He led them to a viewing port where Earth was visible in the distance. "My people have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. For thousands of years we lived on a world that tried to kill us. Earthquakes, storms, diseases, ice ages. We learned to adapt or die." Min nodded. "When I was growing up, my grandmother told me stories about the old days. Before fusion power, before faster-than-light travel, before any of this." She gestured around the ship. "Humans learned to make do with whatever we had. We got good at taking broken things and making them work better than they ever worked when they were new." They continued walking through the ship. Talwex noticed crew members working in ways he'd never seen before. A young woman named Sul was interfacing with a computer system simply by thinking at it. Her thoughts appeared as holographic equations that she could grab and reshape with her hands. "Quantum computing," Jin explained, noticing Talwex's stare. "Sul there is having a conversation with our navigation system. It thinks faster than light, so it can calculate our position in alternate timelines and choose the best path." "But that's impossible," Talwex protested weakly. "Quantum processing at that scale would require things we didn't have," Sul interrupted, not looking up from her equations. "So we made them." They reached another section where the ship's defense systems were displayed. Unlike the massive shield generators Talwex was familiar with, this looked more like a garden. Crystalline structures grew from the walls like plants, humming with energy. "Our shields don't just block attacks," Min explained. "They learn from them." On the screen, she showed recordings from previous battles. In the first engagement, enemy weapons had partially penetrated their shields. But with each subsequent attack, the shields performed better. They began predicting where the next shots would hit. They started redirecting energy back at attackers. Eventually, they became completely immune to weapons they'd never encountered before. "Every hit teaches our shields something new," Captain Hyun said. "We don't just survive attacks, we get stronger from them." Talwex sat down heavily in a chair that immediately adjusted to his unusual body shape. "Your Federation," he said. Slowly, "we always assumed that superior technology came from superior knowledge, from vast databases built up over thousands of years." "Knowledge is important," Min agreed. but adaptability is more important. You have ships that do exactly what they were designed to do perfectly every time. We have ships that learn how to do things they were never designed to do. She showed him another display, a comparison between human ships and Federation. Vessels. The Federation ships were larger, more powerful, built with technology refined over millennia. They excelled at everything they were built for. But the human ships were different. They were smaller, yes, less powerful in some ways, but they could change, adapt, improve, learn. Your Federation builds bigger and stronger, Captain Hyun said. We build smarter. Your ships are masterpieces. Ours are works in progress that never stop improving. Jin grinned from his console. Plus, we had a secret weapon. What's that? Talwex asked. We were too stupid to know what was impossible. Seol called out, her hand still dancing through holographic calculations. So we did it anyway. The truth was beginning to dawn on Talwex. The Federation had centuries of accumulated knowledge, perfect designs proven over time. They knew exactly what could and couldn't be done. Humans had started with nothing but curiosity and stubbornness. When they encountered problems the Federation considered unsolvable, they simply refused to accept that. They tried solutions that shouldn't work. And sometimes, those impossible solutions actually did work. You don't see limitations, Talwex said quietly. You see challenges. Every limitation is just a design problem we haven't solved yet, Min confirmed. And humans are very good at solving problems, especially when someone tells us it's impossible. The bridge of the Iron Phoenix looked nothing like any command center Talwex had ever seen. Instead of the formal, rigid layout of Federation bridges, this felt more like a living room where friends gathered to share ideas. The captain's chair wasn't elevated above the others. It was simply part of a circle where everyone could see and speak to each other. Officer Sewell sat at her station, or rather, floated slightly above it. Her hands moved through the air, grasping. Invisible controls that responded to her thoughts. The holographic displays around her showed star charts, but not static ones. They moved and breathed like living things, showing not just where the ship was, but where it could be, where it should be, and all the paths between. Setting course for the Andromeda relay, Sol announced casually, should arrive in about 3 minutes. 3 minutes. To traverse a distance that would take a Federation ship 2 days. Captain Hyun stood near the main view screen, watching stars streak past in patterns that defied every physics textbook Talwex had ever read. Chief Engineer, he said quietly. I know this is a lot to take in. Talwex nodded slowly. Around him, the human crew worked with an efficiency that seemed almost magical. They didn't bark orders at each other or follow rigid protocols. Instead, they moved like a single organism, each person knowing exactly what the others needed before they asked. Young Officer Park monitored the communication systems, while another crew member named Lee kept watch on the ship's sensors. They worked in perfect harmony, sharing information through glances and gestures rather than formal reports. In the Federation, Talwex said finally, we have rules for everything, protocols, procedures, a specific way to do each task that has been refined over thousands of years. Engineer Jin looked up from his console. Sounds kind of limiting. It ensures consistency, Talwex replied. Every Federation ship operates exactly the same way. Every crew knows precisely what to expect. Captain, Hyun smiled. That works well when you're doing things the way they've always been done. But what happens when you encounter something new? Talwex thought about the Federation's first contact protocols, the lengthy debates in the council chambers, the months of preparation required before any major decision. Compare that to these humans who seem to adapt and innovate in real time. Officer Kang announced from the navigation station, We're approaching the coordinates, Captain. The Federation delegation is requesting permission to come aboard. Granted, Captain Hyun replied. Seoul, make sure our guests have a smooth transition. Talwex realized he'd been so absorbed in watching the crew that he hadn't noticed they'd arrived at the meeting point. Through the view screen, he could see 3 massive Federation cruisers waiting. Each ship was 10 times the size of the Iron Phoenix, their hulls gleaming with the perfection of centuries-old design. Impressive ships, Lieutenant Yoon commented politely. Big, agreed Jin. Must be hard to park. Sul laughed, and the sound was picked up by the others. Not the nervous laughter of subordinates trying to impress a superior, but the comfortable banter of friends who'd worked together for years. Talwex stared at the Federation ships, thinking of their thousands of crew members, their massive engines, their rigid command structures. Everything about them screamed power and authority. They represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, the combined wisdom of 100 advanced species, and they were already obsolete. "Chief Engineer, Captain?" Hyun asked gently. "Are you all right?" Talwex stood silently for a long moment, watching the stars wheel past. He thought of his own ship, the Star Dominion, pride of the Federation fleet. Its engine room was larger than this entire vessel. Its crew of 5,000 followed procedures that had been unchanged for centuries. Its weapons were powerful, enough to shatter planets, and compared to this small human ship, it was a relic. Finally, he found his voice. "I need to send a message to the Federation Council." Captain Hyun nodded. "Of course, use any of our communication systems. Thank you." Talwex paused, choosing his words carefully. "I need to tell them that everything we thought we knew about space travel, about warfare, about technology itself, it's all changed." The bridge grew quiet. The human crew exchanged glances, understanding the weight of the moment. "The galaxy is about to become a very different place," Talwex continued. "We've spent millennia believing that bigger meant better, that older meant wiser, that the established way was the only way." Officer Sul looked up from her station. "We never tried to challenge anyone," she said softly. "We just wanted to explore the stars." "But you've changed everything by doing it your way," Talwex replied. "Every established power, every alliance, every assumption about what's possible. Humans have rewritten all the rules." As they watched, the Iron Phoenix began to charge its hyperspace engine. The process was silent, smooth, almost gentle. No violent energy buildup, no dramatic countdown. "Engaging hyperdrive," Sul announced. The universe folded around them and the Federation ships vanished as if they'd never existed. Stars became lines, lines became nothing, and nothing became everything. When they emerged, Talwex realized they were now on the other side of the galaxy. "That's impossible," he whispered, but he was getting tired of saying that. Captain Hyun smiled. "In human culture we have a saying, the impossible just takes a little longer. Turns out we were wrong about that too. Sometimes the impossible just takes asking the right question." As Talwex prepared to transmit his message to the Federation Council, he realized that humanity's greatest weapon hadn't been their technology or their innovation. It had been something much simpler and much more dangerous to the established order. It had been their refusal to believe in limitations. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in centuries, Talwex found himself excited about what the future might bring.